Hello everyone, and welcome back to my reading of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. I'm G, and this might be a slightly familiar location. Given that we've been here before, I just came back here in order to grab the book here. Oh dear God, wait, no. I should probably go back to the start of the book, shouldn't I? So, we only have a couple more books left before it's just the books in the big palace of the King's Rotunda. So we're getting close to the end of this little mini-series here. And I, for one, am pretty excited. But anyways, let's begin. I can't take it. After all of our efforts to ensure everyone's safety down here in the cavern, yet another accident has taken the life of another friend. It's too much. For years I've been stressing that the restoration must be handled carefully, that extreme caution should be our byword. There is no reason to rush. Then recently, the explorers began showing up. Despite our warnings, despite our statements that we're moving and working as quickly as we safely can, it wasn't fast enough for them. They just don't comprehend. We've been working down here for over 10 years, yet they think that they know better, that we can just approve areas more quickly. I've tried to impress upon them the importance of moving slowly, deliberately, carefully. My warnings seem to fall on deaf ears. Their enthusiasm is understandable. Their disregard for the safety of the people down here is not. Then Phil returned. He'd been gone over a year after he disappeared behind the door we were unable to open in Ederkimo. We had worried about him, hoping he was still okay. It was great to have him back and know he was okay, but he was just as willing to risk his safety and disregard our precautions as the explorers. Now, just a few weeks after his return, he was in an unauthorized area today and was killed when a wall collapsed on him. The accidents must be stopped. It started with Branch being killed in an accident in one of our trips in 91, then the death of Elias in 93 because his obsession with the restoration had caused him to neglect his health, then all the needless injuries suffered by various restoration engineers over the years, and now the death of Phil. That is the final straw. It has to stop. I cannot bear the responsibility of the restoration any longer. The price is too high. I don't know where I'm going. I've been wandering the tunnels for days, no direction, no purpose, trying to clear my head. Nothing happy about this new year. I keep running over it in my head. I've been so committed to this project for so long, maybe I've been deluding myself about the truth. What if we've been wrong all along? What if Jeff's been right? Maybe the restoration should take a completely different direction. It's hard to imagine that I'm saying this. I'm still in denial that we've spent so many years of our lives heading in the wrong direction. But the very fact that I can even entertain that as a possibility means something. The restoration cannot continue as we had planned. It breaks my heart, but I know deep down that it's true. So much time, so many plans, so much. Gone. So much. I still can't believe I'm even thinking this, but that's the way it has to be. Will the other restoration members understand? Maybe. The explorers won't, I'm sure. Can't be helped. The restoration can't continue after these events. But all that work, all the progress we were making. No words to describe how angry it makes me, even while knowing inside that this is how it must be. Such a waste. No, there must be a way. Something else we can do to continue the restoration and still ensure everyone's safety. Surely now that people have seen tragedy firsthand, they'll recognize how important our caution is. Depression. It won't work. We tried that for months. Even Phil's death won't change it. I realize now that Atris was right. He said that the city and the cavern should not be restored. I believed for years that his admonition didn't include those of us from the surface, that we could somehow be a loophole in his concerns. But he was right. I finally see that now. What do we do now? Phil said that he had been on a journey and was convinced that there was a better way. I need to talk to Ikuro. I find myself here, in a familiar place that suddenly holds so much more meaning. Here at the very crossroads, the pivotal juncture of Denis and human intertwining. The very room where Tiana once rested with her young son Gen. Where Gen and his own son Atris slept along their journey. This small room, on the cusp of the grandest of rooms, a tiny resting place half of the distance up, or down the great shaft itself, a pause halfway between here and there. I find myself here. It's been my pause, my chance to ponder. I've been wondering for 3 weeks, grieving, thinking, fasting, reflecting, pausing. Pausing from the cares of work, of rebuilding of rules, of structure, of people and places, of frictions and factions, of life and death. And now I realize that I have only looked on Denia's bones. My rebuilding was only an attempt to reassemble the dried dead bones into a dried dead skeleton. No more alive, but arranged to poorly mimic what once was alive. I somehow thought that those dried bones would live again and become the storyteller, telling the things I longed to know. I still long to know. I still feel a calling. I am meant to be part of Denis somehow. I am drawn here because it holds an answer for me. But now I understand that I need more than a dead story from a pile of bones. I need a storyteller who lives. And so here I am, small, on the edge of vast unknown. This place that seems so appropriate. I have come to a conclusion. A conclusion that goes against who I was, but fills me with life and hope. I will take a leap of faith. I will take a new journey. The journey that Phil encouraged me to take for myself. A journey that is out of my control. I will jump into something and lose myself. Take a journey to places unknown, whose end is not yet written. I will follow Yisha's mysterious beckoning. Somehow, even writing it lifts my spirit. I am returning to the surface to do just that. And you, friend, if you have not already done so, should do the same. Leap without truly understanding what lies beneath, and let a glimpse of the future rise up to meet you. I'm terrified, but also full of hope that Denis can now truly be restored, alive again. And the storyteller will be alive, and it will be me. Analysis. Author, Simpson. Transcribed from voice recorder. Age, The Watcher's Sanctuary. Okay, where to get started? The room itself is actually pretty simple, and at first glance doesn't seem to have much to it. Well, for your average explorer, there's actually much more here than meets the eye. Much more, at least as far as history. It's practically dripping off the walls. Fortunately, I dig that stuff. Lucky for you, I'm also better than your average explorer. Might be getting ahead of myself. Structure. Circular room with a number of doorways leading off in each direction. Large staircase, might need some support work, leads to an upper level. Okay, this just doesn't work without knowing some of the history and story behind this place. I gotta start there. I've done some translation and talked with Watson. This is great stuff. Alright, the tree off the balcony. I did do a little walking around. I can't see it well, dark, but it's an old tree. Don't know exactly when it was created. Although certain style and material elements suggest as far back as the early 2000s, long before a guy called the Watcher came around. And it's the Watcher that this place was created for, renovated for, and dedicated to from the time it was built in the late 4000s until the fall of Denis. The Watcher lived during the mid-4000s and spent most of that life on hidden, secluded ages. He wrote a book called Words, a prophetical book, Nostradamus type guy. Strange, though it doesn't seem his prophecies caught on real well at first, through a variety of events. You can ask somebody else if you want to know them all. The guy became more and more popular, then faded, then popular again. You know the deal. There was always a core group of followers, but the overall population wavered. I would imagine depending on how accurate they viewed his visions. Over the course of time, a whole lot of copies of his books were printed. We found plenty of them. As I mentioned, the tree, which I still don't know how to actually get to, was built long before the Watcher. No one at the DRC seems to know exactly what it was for. Best guesses are that the tree was built early on as a representation of the Denis that had come here, the new tree. They definitely had a thing for trees. So the Watcher comes along and writes some prophecies. They end up becoming pretty popular, and they do deal quite a bit with the tree, as much of Denis prophecy does, and an unknown guy builds this building with the tree as its focus. Seems like the building was an upper-class lounge or sitting room, pub, something along those lines. The intellectuals come and discuss the philosophies and politics of the day, though there was some homage being paid to the Watcher and his thoughts and ideas. The sanctuary, or whatever you want to call it, stayed successful even while ownership changed. It seems it changed as frequently as the philosophies and religious views of the people. It wasn't until Kadish came along, yes, our good old friend Kadish, that the thing really took off. Unfortunately, right before the fall, I've just realized I haven't moved in the past few minutes, I'm standing in a building giving an analysis of it without moving. Gotta love history. So back to it. Nice little coves in this place. Wouldn't be bad at all with a cigar and... Oh, okay, Kadish in the fall. Kadish was the last guy to own it, and it seems he did some renovations. This is where the history and current day setup get interesting. The Watcher spoke quite a bit in words about someone known as the Grower. The Grower is prophesied to do a number of things, and it seems there were numerous interpretations of the Grower. Some saw this person as little more than a great lord or king, while others saw this person as a superhuman miracle worker, godlike conquering time, space, and dimensions, and everything else. The views on the Grower were as varied as you can imagine. What's important is that Kadish viewed himself as the Grower, as the one the Watcher had prophesied about. As a result, he modified the pub to honor not only the prophet, but himself as well. He seemed to be intent on fulfilling as many of the prophecies as he could. so he built this puzzling path of the shell to the tree, brought the Arcana book here, Kadish was the engineer behind its construction, brought the Anane book here, and claimed that it allowed him to travel through time, back to the Denis homeworld as it was, as it is, and as it would be. Kadish claimed he wrote the book. All of those things to fulfill the prophecies. Even the times of Denis were significant because the Watcher claimed to see visions of the past, present, and future. As a result, he wrote what he saw, never knowing if it would occur in the future, had already occurred in the past, or was occurring as he wrote. People flocked to the place. Not only was it the only way to travel through time, but Kadish himself was the only one who could solve the spiral path of the shell and access the tree. In fact, he would demonstrate his ability to anyone who wanted to come and watch. Nightly challenges were held to see if anyone else could access the room. It seems no one ever did, further confirmation of Kadish as the grower. Kadish bragged that the Watcher clearly spoke of how to solve the room in his prophecies, and that anyone could find the solution there. Easy to say when you did build the thing. Maybe I don't get something. Either way, good luck reading through all of those and figuring out anything, let alone the solution to some kind of weird Denis puzzle. So it seems that Kadish ran the sanctuary up to the end. Obviously at some point we know he died. We've all seen the remains of the poor guy. An odd end for a guy that seemed to have so much, had a book right there but didn't use it. But that's another story. Okay, history out of the way, and I guess I should finish with the spiral path room. I'm not a big puzzle guy, but the room seems very confusing. A switch closes the door and turns on the light, and some mechanism releases the ball back to its starting point. There are numbers scratched at the walls of the maze as well. Enough of that. I can see myself going crazy in a place like this. The Denis. Oddly, there is no physical access to or from the city that surrounds the building. We know the building is up in Jatairi, a nice district, but there is definitely no way to get in from the outside and vice versa. Not sure if Kadish sealed it up or if it always was, but I would bet the second idea. Makes it handy to limit access. If you don't have a book, you're not getting here. And that would explain why the books here were never destroyed or taken. That's it for now. I'll probably get back here again after checking Arcana and Anane. King Jakreen. Jakreen took the throne in the year 555 at the age of 80. By the time of his coronation, he had already reached the rank of Guildmaster in the Guild of Stonemasons. It was Jakreen who first publicly stated plans to rebuild the King's Arch. The King's Arch was modeled after a similar design on Gartenay. It was prophesied that the Great King would be welcomed by the arch, and so its construction was obviously seen as very important. In 598, headed by Guildmaster Chorus of the Guild of Stonemasons, design of the arch was begun. In 600, construction started, and in 625, the arch was completed. Because Denis numbers are base 25, the year 625 was very significant. It was a day of great celebration, as it marked their first century on Earth, and because of the prophecies, allowed for the passage of the Great King. As a result, from the time of its completion onward, all kings sailed to the arch as part of their coronation ceremony. As construction of the arch was underway, Jakreen planned for constructions of the Temple of the Great King. Specifications for the building were recorded in ancient prophecies. Most were taken from the Regeltvok of Urpa, and Jakreen made sure that each was followed through to the last span. Construction was finished in 643. It should be noted that at the time of construction, there were apparently quite a few people who questioned the dimensions of the building, calling them rather odd and exorbitant. However, Jakreen would hear nothing of their complaints, and in fact managed to anger quite a few of those who worked on the temple during its construction, as recorded in Guild of Stonemasons records. Once the temple was complete, Jakreen ordered the transfer of the gold throne from the temple that Rhinaref had built to the new temple of the Great King. In 654, Jakreen's wife gave birth to a son. Unfortunately, the boy only lived for 10 years before dying of a rare disease. It is not known what the disease was. Records only indicate extremely high temperatures and extremely sore and brittle bones. It was not 10 years after the death of the boy that Jakreen's wife passed away, also at a young age. The tragedy seemed to have had a devastating effect on Jakreen, and in his later years he was known to be easily angered and extremely harsh. He remarried in 700, and his second wife gave birth to a son 17 years later, followed by 2 daughters. Records speak of various accusations of abuse towards his children, though nothing was ever proven. Regardless of whether or not there was abuse, it seems he was never able to get over the death of his son and first wife. As one of the prophetesses who advised him wrote in her journals, he never seemed to really love or appreciate any of them, though he did leave the throne to the oldest of them. It was Jakreen who encouraged further private construction for the island in 775, including the Jatairi district. He named the high-class district after his first son, who had died 111 years earlier. Jakreen died of natural consequences in 812 at the age of 337. It was often said that Jacrine died a very sad and unsatisfied man. King Visha. Visha took the throne in the year 812 at the age of 95. When Visha took the throne, he already had 2 sons of his own and ended up having 3 more before his death, a large number for Denis. Though his father had completely rejected religion in his later years, Visha was an extremely religious man who, some say, tried too hard to push his convictions on the peoples, and in the end, probably pushed away many. In fact, he forced into law a number of strict guidelines pertaining to marriage and adultery, as well as oaths and vows, many of which were removed by his son. Many say the greatest mark of Visha's reign concerned the health of his 5th son. The boy was a maintainer, and at the age of 50, on a routine check of ages, was almost killed. Though the cause of his near death is unclear, certain documents point to inhalation of toxic gases, he ended up falling into a deep coma that the healer said he would never come out of. In response, Visha gave a powerful speech boldly announcing to the people that Yavo would heal his son and that he would awake again. Despite opposition from the church, 2 prophetesses who advised him and the Guild of Healers, Visha maintained his faith for over 3 years until the impossible happened and his son awoke. Though many disagreed with Visha's religious convictions, there was not a single Denis besides Visha who was not shocked by the awakening and forced to look again at their own faith in Yavo. From the Miracle, written by Teshan in 1072. Visha died of natural consequences in 997 at the age of 280. He left the throne to the reborn son, Mararon. King Mararon. King Mararon took the throne in 997 at the age of 73, exactly 20 years after emerging from his long coma. From various speeches and writings, it's obvious Mararon placed a strong value on life. Through his 162 years in power, it seems he did all he could to emphasize that same value to his people, as well as make the most of his own. It seems that a main concern of Mararon was the Denis education system. The fact that so many of his own people were falling by the wayside apparently upset him quite a bit. So in 1124, when Tilanar, a guildmaster of the Guild of Legislators, submitted his paper, Minor Guilds, Mararon was in immediate agreement with what it said. In the paper, Tilanar wrote, "We are creating a group of people who have no understanding of the Denis and the strength of our blood. There is the relatively small percentage of those who learn and keep our traditions through the guilds, and a growing population of fools." Mararon, following suggestions within the paper, placed the common schools under the Guild of Legislators and began major renovations of that system, including higher standards for instructors and longer workdays. Mararon also raised the time in the common schools from 6 years, age 10 to 16, to 15 years, age 5 to 20. From there, instead of entering back into society, as had been the case, students could enter one of the new minor guilds that had been proposed by Tilanar and accepted by Mararon. The first of these guilds included architecture, a branch of the Guild of Stonemasons, miners, and educators, and bankers among others. While not pushing education, Mararon was focused on his own life, making sure that he was living it to the fullest. Most historical documents point to addictions to hallucinogenic drinks and various drugs. As well, it seems he carried out numerous affairs, prompting him to throw out the rules that his father had written regarding marriage and adultery. One particular record shows of affairs with prophetesses, although both of the prophetesses and the religious community vehemently denied it. Any relationship between the king and his prophetess was extremely looked down upon, as both parties were expected to remain objective with one another and the people. The public said little of Mararon's shortcomings, choosing to focus more on the benefits he had brought them than the negatives. He died at the fairly early age of 235 in 1159 from natural consequences. Most expected the early death from his drinking and smoking, although many say it was somehow related to his coma years earlier. King Corinne took the throne in 1159 at the age of 50. Corinne was the older of Mararon's 2 sons, and the 2 brothers were apparently close. His younger brother was a guild captain in the Guild of Linguists, and the 2 remained close for much of Corinne's reign. In 1159, when he took the throne, it would have been impossible to forecast the turbulent string of events that would start during his reign and not end for some years later. His grandfather had been an extremely religious man, though not everyone had agreed with his theologies. There were in fact a number of groups who had strongly disagreed with Visha, and though Mararon had not done anything to offend them, during the reign of Corinne they sought to make their own causes more widely known. The most dangerous of those groups was known as the Judges of Yavo. Known as the Regolantanteok judges, the sect believed they were to exercise Yavo's judgment on those who could not truly understand him as they did. Though they had existed for some time, it was in 1303 that they began to make a name for themselves. It all seems to have begun when a writer mysteriously left the Guild of Writers in 1303. A few days later, books and ink went missing from their respective guilds. Corinne ordered tightened security on the guilds, as well as a massive search for the vanished writer, but all to no avail. Unbeknownst to Kareen, the judges, led by the man Iris, were writing illegal ages in an attempt to create a race they could control and force to go to war for them. In 1320, the Pento Age was written, and the judges had what they needed. It was in 1323, with his wife about to give birth to his first son, that Kareen's palace was attacked by a group of judges, along with warriors from the Age of Pento. Kareen ordered his family out of the palace, as it was quickly being overtaken, and together they traveled to the other side of the city where a special linking book was waiting for them. While traveling through the king's arch, rumors say that Kareen's wife gave birth to his first son, Alcindar. Kareen continued to live in the city, although his family stayed in a secret private age. The city grew more and more dangerous as the judges began to destroy more of the city and kill more of its citizens. Kareen poured money into the city guard as well as the small military of the day, although it seemed too little, too late. In 1352, Kareen was assassinated by a group of Pento warriors being led by judges. The city was thrown into complete chaos. King Alcindar, the Great King. Alcindar was 29 and living on a private age with his mother when his father was killed. Instead of immediately joining the city, he remained in the private age, apparently at the suggestion of his uncle, who had come to inform Alcindar of his father's death. With a few advisors who kept him updated, Alcindar stayed in the private age trying to formulate a plan for the war that was now raging in his city. Meanwhile, his uncle, still a member of the Guild of Linguists, was translating much of the Pento language and learning as much as he could about them. As it turned out, the judges, with the Pento, claimed control of the Dini government after the deaths of Kareen and began to move into other ages. Alcindar, after being briefed by his uncle on new information, continued to wait. A few weeks later, the waiting appeared to pay off. Reports came back that the judges had killed the leader of the Pento for fear he was becoming more powerful and out of control. Unfortunately, the leader had not declared an heir and had left 2 sons to fight for the throne. This led to civil war within the Pento and a complete lack of focus on the Dini, leaving the judges empty-handed. As well, what forces there were spread out to other ages and no longer fortified in the city. The public apparently knew Alcindar was hiding, and with every passing day felt as though the prophecies were coming to fruition. Only the stone while they pass beneath listens to his cries and comfort her fear. Only the arch welcomes the reign of the Great One who guides us. Alcindar, they all knew, had been born directly under the arch. A new people, people of light, will bring great havoc to the dark, as they believed the Pento had done. He remains hidden, while another sits in his throne, was obvious. While the public waited for him, they only grew more willing to fight for him. 15 weeks after the death of his father, Alcindar entered the city for the first time in his life with a small force. He sailed directly through the arch to the palace and reclaimed it with relative ease while directing his soldiers and those who joined with him as they saw him enter the city. Immediately, he established safe zones, and eventually informed the Pento that he wished to begin negotiations with the Pento warrior Makar. The 2 brothers were fighting for control of the Pento, and Makar felt most strongly that his people no longer owed the judges anything. His brother, Timawe, felt the opposite. Alcindar agreed to help Makar defeat his brother if, in return, they would return to their home peacefully. Makar agreed if Alcindar would write them an age to return to. The deals were signed, and in 1376, Alcindar led a force to the Pento Age. It was there, in the Battle of the Great King, that Alcindar led the defeat of Makar's brother Timawe and total victory for Dini. Makar turned over 2 leaders of the judges, and Alcindar found the other 3 in the city. All 5 were sent to prison ages, and the books burned. Some in the city had demanded execution, but Alcindar had refused. Regardless, his coronation ceremony took place a few weeks later, and it was said, not one of Dini did not attend the event. Our cheering was as loud as thunder, and our pride as solid as the arch through which he sailed. From The Great King, written by Lashena in 1399. Throughout his reign, Alcindar wrote a good number of books of prophecies and encouraged his people to forget about their old homeland and focus on why they came to Dini, to start again, to focus on pleasing Yavo, and to make good and right decisions. To know Yavo better should be the focus of their lives, he claimed. It was Alcindar who brought them back to the attitude they had maintained during the reign of Rinaref. During his life, there were numerous rumors abounding about Alcindar and special linking abilities. Numerous witnesses claimed that he did not need linking books to go from one place to another, and numerous others claimed he could link to different spots within an age. However, none of these rumors were ever confirmed. There were apparently other rumors, much more quiet, which dealt with Alcindar and his relationship with the prophet Nimiya. Though it seemed that Nimiya had great respect for Alcindar, the same could not be said concerning Alcindar's opinion of Nimiya. Apparently, the Great King had little time for her and often found her advice foolish and childish when he did consult with her. Nimiya's Legacy, written by Teman in 1609. As a result, it seems Nimiya was rarely seen with the Great King and relegated to figurehead role for ceremonies and the like. Perhaps surprisingly, Alcindar rarely consulted with any other prophets, though he did have the choice. Unbeknownst to the public who continued to praise him, Alcindar was working with the guilds of writers and healers on a plague. It was said that it could be used as a biological weapon in case such action was ever needed in the future. As far as the Pento, the link between their age and Denis was still open, as Alcindar insisted on the continuation of resources from the Pento, although it appeared that some of his associates advised against it. It was in 1466 that Makar came to the palace, through other books given to him by judges, and killed Alcindar's wife and 2 sons. Alcindar himself killed Makar in what records describe as an astounding battle. 2 days later, Alcindar ordered the release of the plague to the new Pento age. Apparently, his counselors advised against it, but he demanded his orders be carried out. The plague was released, though records don't specify how, and the entire population of Pento died 3 days later. Unfortunately, it seems as though most of them realized what was happening and did not die before linking to a number of other ages and infecting numerous other cultures. The sickness did not affect Denis, although the Guild of Chemists began to fear that it could mutate to something that would. Once the public became aware of the plague, they obviously blamed the Pento for the devastation as they had no knowledge of Alcindar's participation in the plague. All of the books to which the Pento had access were gathered together, to be forever destroyed. Then, in 1500, Alcindar gathered his people together to inform them of the truth. It was in that speech that he told them he had created the plague, and then ordered its release. At the end of the speech, he asked to be sealed into the temple of the Great King, as built by Jacrine, with any infected books as well as any books that linked to Denis to their past. As he had preached, they must completely forget. A year later, Alcindar was sealed within the temple, and it was then that the dimensions and shape of the buildings made sense, as it was required to hold massive amounts of books. Solath, Alcindar's chosen heir, took temporary charge of Denis while the public waited for the Great King's return. Though not done often, it was possible for a king to leave the throne to his successor if he wished to be gone for an extended period of time. However, after 6 months had passed, records state that Solath uncovered the final wishes of Alcindar and read them publicly. Alcindar, he read, was not to return, and for no reason should the seal in the temple of the Great King ever be broken. In addition, the note stated that Solath should be officially designated as permanent king. So convincing was Solath's shock upon reading the note, it was said that the thought of the note being a hoax was never considered. No records point to the note being anything but the true wishes of the Great King, but it is interesting to note that it was never even thought of as a fabricated note. Numerous personal journals and government transcripts state the public's disbelief at the statements. Solath himself said, "For how could he leave us in such a state?" Though there were many calls to break the seal of the temple, a direct command of the Great King was foolish. As well, the books within the seal were infected books and should not be opened for good reason, as spoken by Grand Master Namis of the Guild of Healers to the council. So, in 1502, the Temple of the Great King was renamed the Tomb of the Great King upon orders of Solath, and he was assumed dead. However, most still believed he would return. King Solath. Solath took the throne in 1502 at the age of 79. It should be noted that at his coronation ceremony, Solath was given a newly designed crown. Alcindar had retained his own, and it was common opinion among the Denis that such a crown should not be worn again. It should also be stated that Solath's father had been the Grand Master of the Guild of Writers and had helped Alcindar create the book that was responsible for the plague. Why Alcindar chose Solath in particular he never stated. Regardless, Solath inherited a fairly stable culture, although one that was on the fringe of religious anarchy. The greatest leader of their time had left them, and they were a lost people without him to guide them. There were going to be repercussions, although it's doubtful anyone had sensed that they would occur so quickly, most of all Solath. It was in 1520 that the prophet Nimiya, who had been the Great King's own advisor, wrote the Book of Nimiya and sent the culture into religious upheaval. The book denounced the words of the Great King, calling him a fraud and an impostor, and gave a logical argument to each of his writings. He killed thousands, betrayed us, and left us with no one to guide us. How do we believe his words and expect him to still return? The book stated. At first, there was outrage at the writings, and Nimiya was declared a fool and a heathen, most loudly by King Solath, who apparently took offense to the writing. In 1527, Nimiya vanished. Some said killed by an angry mob, and others said taken away by angels. Regardless, by 1550, there was a growing sentiment that Nimiya's book carried some truth. There was a growing tide of disharmony within the people, and there was nothing Solath could do to stem it. Those who had always thought the Great King would return were beginning to understand that he would not, and they were beginning to grow angrier at the way he had left them. Suddenly, there were numerous reasons to believe that Nimiya's writing may have carried some truth. "Perhaps we have all been betrayed by the man we once called great," wrote one anonymous writer. Looking back, credit should be given to Salath for keeping his people as unified as he did. In 1604, he announced his plans to create Karim, a civic district including an opera house and a concert hall. The distraction away from the religious arguments was obvious to the public, but they seemed to welcome it. There was excitement from his proposal and construction began in 1610. The entire area was not finished until 1650 due to varying construction problems, but when he finally did open, there was a great excitement within the culture. Salath's wife passed away in 1735, leaving him with 2 daughters. It was not long after her passing away that he remarried, against the advice of the prophetess, to a younger woman named Jalatha. Jalatha gave birth to Salath's first son in 1748, and though Salath was extremely pleased, many in the religious community were somewhat apprehensive. Public records clearly indicate that Jalatha was a well-known member of an influential cult group known as the Tree, although Salath denied that fact to the day of his death. The culture remained fairly stable until the death of Salath in 1779. He was 356 years old and left the throne to his firstborn son. And I think that that's a pretty good place to cut it. We have learned a fair bit about the kings of Denis, and a little bit about Dr. Watson as well. And just... yeah, everything is starting to come together. I'm really interested to see where this goes in Mist 5, because there's a lot of seeds being planted in terms of plot. But either way, thank you all so much for following my read-through of the books in Uru Ages Beyond Mist, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.